I know this feels like deja vu all over again, but we are starting the 76th class here on Google Classroom. And if I click on class 76, the Cuban Missile Crisis, you will see two rectangles, just like yesterday. One is the PowerPoint, one is the assignment, and you can probably guess what I'm going to say. Check out the assignment first so you know the objective. And there are four things I'm going to ask you to answer for me. Number one, I'm going to ask you to provide me a synopsis of the story of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Pretty straightforward drill there. And then number two, what were President Kennedy's 6 options on how to handle this? One of the most difficult decisions that a world leader has ever had to make. And then number three, rank the decisions from the best course of action to the worst. And then for number four, walk in my shoes as a teacher, feel the power of the 5 letters. And give President Kennedy an A to E grade for his performance and explain your rationale for the grade you gave him. Okay, so the Cuban Missile Crisis. I don't know how much you remember from last year. Talking to people, some know a lot, some know a little, and some know jack squat. So I'm going to start with the premise that you know jack squat. If you already know something, you're ahead of the game. So the Cuban Missile Crisis, the story, begins with Cuba. That makes sense. Now, Cuba is very close to America, 90 miles. As a matter of fact, this is a little marker for the southernmost point in the United States, 90 miles to Cuba. So geographically, Cuba was threatening because they were so close to the United States. Now, a little life tip. Here's me arriving to that southern point, and there was a line to take an Instagram picture that probably went on for probably an hour. It was a huge line. So, little life tip if you're traveling. If you know there's an obvious tourist attraction, show up at off hours, not in the peak of the day. Now, if you do make this mistake, try to weasel out of it by avoiding the line. So instead of having that perfect Instagram picture, I just snuck around, took a little side shot, and I got some dirty looks, but I never saw those people again. Facts. Okay, little life tip. Okay, so Cuba. I've also had the opportunity to go to Cuba, and this is Havana, Cuba. And you can see they had these type of old 1960s cars all over the place. Beautiful, beautiful cars. It was a fantastic city. The people were very nice. The architecture was great. However, communism, you can make an argument, really killed Cuba. And these beautiful buildings and fountains and whatnot were made pre-communism. And the fact there's all these 1960s cars around is because they had to keep them up. A lot of these cars were around pre-1959 because they didn't get new cars in, okay? So I talked about that in class. Now, anyway, enough of the personal stuff, onto the historical stuff. So let's start with the Spanish-American War of 1898. So in the Spanish-American War, America procured Guam, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Cuba. And once America was there, corporations came in and made a lot of money off of Cuba. It was very lucrative to the United States. And from 1898 till 1959, Americans honeymooned there. A lot of business interests were there. A lot of money was being made. And then this guy, Fidel Castro, overthrows Batista, the U.S.-backed dictator. And now we have a communist nation 90 miles from America at the peak of the Cold War. You can guess how tense that was when Castro took over. Okay? And again, it wasn't that they were just communist. Castro nationalized the U.S. industries, especially the sugar industry. America was making tons of money off of this. They're no longer making money off of Cuba. And if you play with somebody's money, you play with their emotions. Cuba played with America's money, and they played with our emotions. And it got worse. Castro takes over all of the U.S. businesses. And in 61, the U.S. breaks off all diplomatic relations, saying, we are done with you. We're not even talking to you. And then the Bay of Pigs, okay? 1,400 anti-Cuban exiles attempted to overthrow Castro. It did not work, and it made the Cubans and their communist allies incredibly upset. So by autumn of 62, Cuba has received a ton of USSR-produced missiles, jets, boats, personnel. And here's the picture to show the love affair between the USSR and Cuba. It's getting dicey. It is getting tense. Okay, so why was the USSR interested in helping Cuba? To help a new communist state, okay, part of this Warsaw Pact NATO world of the Cold War we were living in, to get a launch base for intercontinental ballistic missiles. 90 miles, you really can't defend against a missile for that short distance. To test the strength of the new U.S. president, and Khrushchev wanted to force JFK to bargain over U.S. missiles in Europe. So Khrushchev is saying, listen, we're going to threaten America here in Cuba, forcing America's hand in Europe. Okay, so Kennedy is left with a very, very difficult decision. Okay, so on October 14th, 1962, U.S. U-2 spy plane takes photos of suspected Soviet missile sites in Cuba. And here's the picture. Here's the primary source. It was too close for comfort, and the evidence was strong that they were a threat. This wasn't paranoia. This is a legitimate, evidence-based threat. So missile sites nearing completion could be ready in 7 days. 20 Soviet ships were bound for Cuba carrying nuclear missiles. This could have been the end of the road for human beings at this point. And here are one of those missiles, now museum quality to look at. Okay. And the missile locations you can see were set up. Okay. Here's Florida. Here are missile sites. Again, evidence-based, scary scenario. Okay. Now, the capability of these missiles are this far. Yes, Detroit is there. So they could pretty much take out the majority of the United States, Canada, Mexico. Very, very dangerous location to have nuclear missiles for our safety. Now, these two were very close to meeting. Now, this is a bucket of feces. This is a large industrial fan. Now, if I were to take this bucket of feces and throw it into this large industrial fan, where would the feces go? You're bright people. The answer is everywhere. Fan, feces, everywhere. You get that. Okay, that was an analogy. But this could have been game over. I mean, absolutely end of mankind over. These are the stakes of this situation. So mankind, not just America, the world was nervous, and rightly so. You know, you can see these people saying, please be careful, President Kennedy. Here's Kennedy meeting with his military leaders to do what, figure out the right course of action. Will there be war over Cuba? People were nervous, and rightly so. So President Kennedy had 6 options. This is tough. This is a very tough job. And before I tell you, what would you do in Kennedy's shoes? Now, in class we talked about this, but if you're absent and you're watching this video, just think, what would you have done in his situation? Okay, anyhow. Option 1, he could have done an airstrike, at least against the missile sites and perhaps against wider targets. Now, downside, he may have provoked a Soviet response in West Berlin, and that would have been a chain reaction. But option 1 was an airstrike. Option 2, do nothing. Ignore the missiles in Cuba. The U.S. had military bases in 127 different countries. The U.S. had nuclear missiles in several countries close to the Soviet Union. Therefore, it's only right that the Soviet Union should be allowed to place missiles in Cuba. He could have done nothing. There's a time and a place. Doing nothing is the best option. I don't want to give my opinion. I want you to think of, what you think is right. Use your own brain. Option 3 for Kennedy. Diplomacy, negotiate, talk, offer the Soviet Union a deal. Have the USSR remove missiles in Cuba if the U.S. withdraws its nuclear missiles from Turkey and Italy. Would have made Khrushchev happy, might have worked. Talk it out, negotiate a deal. Option 4 President Kennedy had, a military blockade. Use the U.S. Navy to block any missiles from arriving in Cuba. Announced that any ships coming into Cuba would be searched for weapons before entering. Soviet ships could decide to not stop when U.S. ships blocked them, which could trigger gunfire and possible escalation. So he could have done a blockade. Okay, option 5. Invasion. Send troops to overthrow Castro. Just straight up military invasion. Missiles could then be put out of action. That might work. I don't know what the reaction of the Soviets would be, but he could have done a traditional military invasion. And option 6, nukes, nuclear weapons. Use nuclear weapons against Cuba and or the Soviet Union. Hey, worked for Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You know, we're only a few years removed from that, so I don't know. I don't know. What would you have done? That's the question. Again, airstrike, do nothing, use diplomacy, try to negotiate, military blockade, invade, or use nuclear weapons. Okay, so think about this. What would you have done in President Kennedy's shoes? Okay, so what actually happened? Okay, on October 20th, JFK decided to blockade Cuba. On October 22nd, he publicly calls on Khrushchev to remove the weapons. So he tried the blockade. Okay, whether you thought that was the right thing or not, that's what he did. On October 24th, Soviet ships, accompanied by a submarine, approached the blockade zone. Here's where it gets really dicey. And we even have it to the minute. October 24th at 10:32 a.m., Soviet ships stop and turn around. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. If they didn't, I don't know if I'd be talking to you right now, quite honestly. So what happened next? On October 25th, photos show continued construction of missile sites. Okay. On the 26th, Kennedy receives an offer. We'll remove the missiles if you end the blockade and promise not to invade Cuba. On the 27th, JFK receives a second letter calling for a withdrawal of U.S. missiles in Turkey as well. Okay. On the 28th, Khrushchev agreed to dismantle Soviet missiles in Cuba, and the U.S. publicly declares it will never invade Cuba and secretly agrees to dismantle missiles in Turkey, try to save some face. You know, there we go. There's a political cartoon. Yep, pretty much summarizes it pretty gosh darn well. Okay, so here's the outcome. Cuba did remain communist and heavily armed, but without nuclear missiles. Thank goodness. The world saw the futility of the idea of mutually assured destruction. That's a positive. It supported the theory of containment and coexistence because alternatives were unimaginable. There was a permanent hotline set up between the White House and Khrushchev to communicate, and the U.S. and the USSR negotiated a nuclear test ban treaty. So, the outcome, by and large, was positive. It could have been immensely negative. Immensely negative. Okay. So anyway, that's the story of the Cuban Missile Crisis. If you can please answer those 4 questions if you were absent, I'd appreciate that, and hopefully this video kept you in the loop. So, thank you for watching.